From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hey everyone, I am Daniel Schweiger, and welcome to Film Music Live, the show where you get to ask the questions to today's top composers. I'm happy to have you here.
Beginning his cinematic musical career singing for the angels in the choir for The Last Temptation of Christ, David Buckley has matured into a composer who stylistically visited heaven and hell a few times over for a gallery of saints and sinners over nearly 80 scoring projects. Starting with arranging and additional composing on such Harry Gregson Williams scores as Flushed Away, The Number 23, and Gone Baby Gone, Buckley began his own distinctive solo composing work for the kung fu fantasy realm of Forbidden Kingdom, created a fearsome Nazi vampire lording over Blood Creek, as well as the badass grooves for Jason Statham's Parker. Some of Buckley's notable works for the big and small screen since have included The Good Wife, Jason Bourne, Greenland, Nobody, and Your Honor. But in my opinion, Buckley's masterwork so far is Netflix's The Sandman, which now reaches the end of its all too short 2-season run. A gorgeously enveloping live-action adaptation of Neil Gaiman's acclaimed graphic series, The Sandman realizes a world of gods and monsters in the realm between sleep and reality, populated with such cosmic characters as death, the devil, delirium, desire, destruction, and our unknowable hero, anti-hero, Dream. Told with a majesty befitting the subject, Buckley's score is a tone poem on the meaning of existence as told by mythic characters, with theme-driven melodies full of lyrical transcendence, fate, and goth romance. It's a lushly enveloping approach that truly sweeps the listener away into a nether realm with the stuff that exceptional streaming soundtracks are made of. Buckley has conquered a seemingly impossible fantasy to adapt with epic grace and feeling, befitting the king of our subconscious, whose lost love for a woman and his own son make him all too human with Buckley's tender and magical scoring that casts a wondrous spell.
And now here is the master behind Morpheus. Welcome, David Buckley.
Hey, Daniel, how are you? Thank you for that.
Oh, you got it. Well,
I think I should hire you as my publicist.
I can do that. But I mean, I think you are absolutely deserving of all the accolades. I mean, I just love the show. And it is really just one of the most beautifully scored shows I can remember in quite a while. It sounds absolutely wonderful. Again, just absolutely hypnotized by it. Now, when you got the Sandman assignment initially, how did you get it? I mean, were you familiar with the character?
Not at all. No, I wasn't aware of it. I mean, it sounded sort of familiar, but it was only when I started the project, I realized that there was this whole universe. I think it's not unusual for a composer to take on a job without knowing the source material. But it did mean sort of my first task was really to catch up with the whole Sandman world and just kind of get up to speed with where everyone else was already up to, which I have to say was a wonderful thing to do. I mean, there's something nice about really not knowing a property at all and just kind of navigating one's way through it. And mercifully, this was all during COVID, and there was quite a lot of time to do that. So that was the first step for me when I got the gig.
Now, I mean, one thing that really just stands out, this show has one of the most beautiful themes I've ever heard, and Aaron Cruz agrees with me. His question is, David, the Kingdom of Dreams, the main title theme of Sandman, is one of the most absolutely favorite themes of all time. Would you be willing to share a few production stories about it?
Yeah, well, actually, it's almost where I almost tendered my resignation over this this cue. I think when you're entering an entirely new world and scoring something that doesn't exist, and really when I started working, I think only a handful, maybe 50% of the episodes had been shot. lots of green screen. So there was a lot of, what is this? What are we making? There was no real kind of template, and there was no real kind of, there was some temp in place, but nothing that sort of really suggested anything too much this way or the other. So it really was a blank canvas. And I guess I didn't really know where we needed to go with it. And it was a little bit challenging because it was during COVID, as I said, and we weren't all, there was never an opportunity really to meet. And I basically spent, quite a while working on episode 1, finished the score and sent it for feedback and notes. And I was sort of like, yeah, we love this. And then it all went kind of quiet. And then eventually there was like, but where's our Sandman tune? And I was like, oh God, yeah, okay, yes, I see what you mean. I've sort of missed a fairly vital part of the process out here. And it kind of threw me into a little bit of a funk and a little bit of a, like, I felt that I'd misstepped because I'd already moved on to other episodes. And I thought, well, how can I have been so stupid? So I had to slightly calm myself down and really spend quite a lot of time not trying to fix it, but actually throwing out a lot of material and coming back to it with this theme in mind. And it was a process. It took a little bit of time, and as how orchestral should it be, how ambient should it be, but eventually we landed there, and there was I got all the nods from the right places, and it was a huge relief. But I did at one point really wobble because I just felt somewhere between sort of embarrassed that it hadn't occurred to me, and also just overwhelmed that I'd written a fair bulk of music, not just in the first episode, but in a few, and just sort of felt kind of shit, basically. But anyway, managed to rescue it, and that the theme was born and really lives on throughout the 2 seasons. Yeah.
Well, what inspired it? I mean, it's one thing to have a theme; it's another thing to have a theme.
Well, I think it's got some of the quirks in it that I quite like. It's interesting how different people have heard it over the time. Someone, when I was working on it, actually, my neighbor, who was unfortunately subjected to it, said he thought it sounded Middle Eastern. I thought it had a sort of early music, some sort of early music quality. It obviously uses these bells at different times, and which have a dreamlike quality. I mean, I can't really. It's always hard to put one's finger on what makes a theme a theme. Why does it stand out? Why is it sort of primary material as opposed to secondary material? I think ultimately, it's clearly got a melodic shape, a descending shape. And I think it's got the sort of things that I think it's got some hope in it, but it's always tempered with despair. It's sort of got the dreams and it's got the nightmares. I certainly, when I can, dress it up in its full choral version. And choral writing is a big part of my sort of musical background. It would be hard for me to analyze it and say it's this because of this. But I do think it's a theme that feels quite honest to me. In fact, the whole score I feel is more representative of how I would like to write, possibly than anything else I've done. So I think it's probably the closest I can say to this is sort of coming from my heart. And often in this business, you're not always allowed to do that. So it felt like a rare opportunity of expression.
Yeah, let's go back to the first season. When we first meet Morpheus in the very first episode, he's essentially imprisoned. That the second season nicely pays that off. But again, you have no idea who he is. He could be a monster or something like that. And I think one of the sequences where the score really just hit me, like, wow, is where the crow flies down to Morpheus's cage. Tell me about setting up Morpheus again when you have no idea who this guy is.
Yeah, it's you're spot on. I mean, he's a difficult character, and again, if you were trying to explain what this show was to someone who didn't know about it, and you say, oh, it's DC and it's superhero. I mean, in many ways, that would give all the wrong indicators of what Sandman is. I mean, he is a complicated person. He's in many ways unlikable. I mean, his theme is it's not a heroic theme in the true sense of the word. It's certainly not, I would say, an overly positive theme. There's, he's a man who is incapable of holding down normal relationships. He's got sort of bitterness, holds grudges. I mean, he's very complicated. And I think, in a moment like that in season 1 with Jessamy the bird, the crow, that's where you did see some affection, and you did see sort of a swelling hope. And it did, in fact, it did almost go sort of superhero-like, but for the bird, more for the bird than it did for Morpheus. So that's what always appealed to me about the show, that it was sort of anti-superhero in a way. This is sort of moping goth, full of all these darker kind of emotions. And to score that, for me, is way more interesting than just sort of upbeat, kicking ass kind of stuff, which, it has its place and has been done brilliantly well. But I think my sort of musical character probably lent itself far better to this more sort of emo territory.
So how do you want to set up the universe of Morpheus and all the characters, his family in the first season? Tell me about the characters.
Well, his family in the first season, we if I recall correctly, we're only really meeting Desire and Death. I think I'm right in saying it's just 3 of the siblings. So it's interesting that those Death's theme, and I think that was possibly one of my favorite episodes, actually, of season 1. I think it was episode 6. And I think what I loved about Death is that it was a very different revelation of death. It wasn't perhaps your archetypal death is worrying and bad. It's actually that death was beautiful, and my task was write this beautiful music that people will hear as they die, as they're taken away. And so I think because I landed something which I think worked quite nicely in season 1, that's definitely swept its way through into season 2. Desire also had a very clear thematic identity, which a sort of slightly strange vocals, kind of sexy heartbeat vocal kind of thing, which came into season 2. But those were our only 3 of the endless who we met there, and then we pretty much we meet them all in the second season, which was really fun. I think the first time they meet, all in all, well, actually at the very beginning of the show, and then they regroup for the wedding. The only person who I never really gave a proper thematic identity to, I wouldn't really say that I did do that, was Despair, largely because she was in so few moments, and the moments she were in were really quite gnarly, quite unpleasant, or at least the first one was. She was sort of clawing her face, and there was talk of a guy who child molester, and it didn't seem like the obvious moment for a big old tune or anything. So that was more sort of dirty texture, but everyone else had a little musical identity, and just depending on how present they were within the show, I could build upon it. I'd say the hierarchy is clearly Dream, and then I think Death holds the slot number 2. And actually, Delirium was quite a fun person to score, her character. But that was an interesting one with Delirium, and it's a bit like, in comedy, you have to make that decision: are you going to score a scene comedically, or are you going to score a scene more straight so that the comedy actually plays possibly better? And Delirium's quite kind of quirky and strange, so I had to find the right temperature of music where I wasn't just doubling up what she was doing. Otherwise it would have felt, it may have lessened the effect rather than augmented it.
And this brings us to a question from Louis Versellini. Hey, David Buckley, season 2 gets more into mythology. Were there any specific instruments used to create this?
Yeah, I mean, so we got a couple of episodes where we're in ancient Greece, and I did some research. In fact, a friend of mine went to university. He's a specialist in Greek music. So I had a couple of phone calls with him, and he basically said, we don't know a whole lot. In fact, there's a few bits of information preserved on some pottery, and there's some evidence that this musical instrument may have been used and these types of mode may have been used. But there's not a huge amount of work that dictates what happened back then. But also my job was not one of provide historical accuracy. Neil Gaiman's comics are not about writing he alludes to things and pilfers from things that he likes, and likewise my music alludes to something, certainly with the Greek episodes, to something that might have a Hellenistic undertone or a instrument that possibly was of the period, but it's not in any way trying to be authentic, far from it. But it's always fun to dip one's toe in a world and take a little element from it and then wrap that up into your own likes and let that be part of a larger set of ingredients. Likewise with Fairy, when there's the whole 12th Night play and all the characters that come from there, there's a sort of quasi Elizabethan feel to some of that music, and I use recorders and mandolins and lutes, and I'd say it's got an Elizabethan flavor, but it's not going to put all Elizabethan composers are long gone, but I'm not trying to literally emulate music from that time. But I think that was one of the things I really did enjoy about season 2, is it felt like there was just a wider. Oh, also there was in episode 4, there's the dance towards the end, which has got Middle Eastern inflections. I forget the name of the character, but I think she was supposed to be a Babylonian queen. There's some African stuff for the Sandman's wife. So I really enjoyed. I've always loved early music. I've always loved world music. And to just be able to expand one's musical horizons with those instruments was a huge amount of fun, and actually really helped. There's a lot of music in the show. It's very score heavy. So to have a wider palette that actually makes sense and that I could utilize was really beneficial for me.
Well, again, please send in your questions for David, and we've got one from Sam 6000. How much direction from the producers did you get on the musical tone they wanted?
Well, I must say the team I work with on this were, I'd say, and they the same on season 1, but they are absolutely lovely. I've done a number of jobs over the years, and it's always, you never quite know what you're going to get. You can get directors who say, we trust you and do what you think is right. And then you've got directors who say, do this or you're off the job. And I've worked with both categories and everyone in between. This was definitely of the, Dave, we've hired you because we want your opinion. We want you. You tell us what this needs. Now, that's not to say that, that I could get away with anything, or that there was no pushback at all. There were some moments where, can you change this? But it really was, I have to say, few and far between. And I think partly that's because we did so much establishing and foundational work on season 1 that everything in season 2 was pretty much temped with my season 1 score. But I will say, though, I never was tempted to say, oh, that worked in season 1, we'll just use that there in season 2. I really didn't want to do that. I knew that we had such a few amount of episodes to tell this story over the course of 2 seasons that I wanted to bring, even if something was vaguely right from the first season in the season 2 temp, I felt I wanted to try and do something else with it, push it along, make it more relevant and more appropriate to this season. And one of the nice things when you don't get given too many notes, or when you're told we trust you, is that you start looking at everything from a place of positivity rather than thinking you might get a chop if you don't deliver what they're expecting first time round. And just having that positive vibe and aura around me helped me enormously in the writing. It almost at times made it feel effortless. And I think the minute you get that sort of anxiety that there's lots of people who might sort of shit all over you, and it's not going to yield good results. I did have to go through the normal processes. I had to play the music to the show's producers, and it had to go to the wider gang, to Netflix and co like that. So there was plenty of opportunity for people to give notes, but I must say it was very note light this season, which is a joy and and a rarity, and I probably shouldn't get used to it.
Right. This is kind of like, I guess, on that tone from Ivan at the Bond music. Now, do you have any disagreements about music when the director wants one thing and you have the feeling that something absolutely different works better? How, like on any project, how do you what's the trick to getting someone to hear things your way?
Well, I think one of the things I wouldn't do is write about it in the national press, which I saw another composer do when they had a famous disagreement on a rather prominent television show. I think the job of the composer is to be able to be fairly agile in the way that they react. I think you want to go into a room in a meeting having absorbed the material that you're working on and walking in there basically saying, I've got an idea. I think it's pretty pointless doing this job and going in there and saying, tell me what to do. That feels like you're not really doing your job. So I think the first thing you do is say, what about this? And they may cotton onto it, or they may say, well, show us what you mean. And then it's a case of, well, do they like it? Do they hate it? Are there bits of it that they like? Are there bits of it hate? And then if ultimately, after repeated efforts, they're just not digging what you do, then I suppose you have to appeal to them and say, well, what is it then? And then your opinions are slightly less important and their opinions become more important. But even then, I think being able to challenge, being able to, challenge sounds as if it's a sort of, there's something antagonistic. Collaborate is the obvious word. I always like to be respectful of the people. I do feel that composers, because we are very late to the party, and these other people have been living and breathing this stuff for so long. I want to be sort of reverential to the people that I'm going into and not just come and kick them out of the way and say, hey, this is how it's done. It's just that fine line, as there are for so many things in this business, fine line between coming up, being an opinion, but not having an opinion without being opinionated, I think is what's critical. But here in this show, they were receptive. There were things I was slightly surprised about that I was able to do, some choral stuff, which I thought maybe they thought it was too much, but they really very, very seldom did they shut me down.
Yeah. So Dale's got a question. In a couple of your studio photographs, we see a guitar viol in the background. Now, can you describe that instrument and detail some of the scores you've used it on?
Well, I got seduced by the guitar viol because I think I'd seen a few other composers. I don't know if it's still prominent now. At one point, it was a sort of instrument du jour. And I had heard someone play it, and I thought, well, that's kind of nice. It falls between the cracks of sort of, it's got this ancient sound on the one hand, but it's also very modern, which is something I love. I love that combination of old and new. So I put my name down on the waiting list, and I think it took 2 or so years to get it, by which point I think I'd almost forgotten that I bought it. It's a sort of instrument where it was just brilliant for someone like me, because I basically can't play it, but you don't really need to be able to play it. You plug it in, you swamp it with effects and reverbs and lots of delays and things, and then all you have to do is just sort of scrape your bow over it, and you've got half of a horror score written without even knowing. I have used it probably slightly more elegantly in a few scores. I didn't use it at all on the Sandman, actually. I've tended to use it where it's a much more sort of dissonant affair, and it's more scrapey and lacking in tonality, shall we say. So over the years, I don't know how recent the picture is of my studio that you've got, but I've collected more and more instruments of varying from different places, and not necessarily good instruments, often quite shitty things, semi-working things. But when you're working in front of a computer all day, it's quite nice once in a while just to pick up something that you can hit, throw at the wall, scrape, knock around, and see if you can get a couple of sounds out of it. And certainly for especially when I'm doing an electronic. In fact, you mentioned Your Honor in the run-in to this in your little thing at the top, and that was a place where I did knock and bat a load of these instruments just to get sort of percussive sounds. And I spent a lot of time just with a computer, and it felt like quite a sterile environment. So having things that which are tactile has actually proved to be quite a nice addition to the way I work.
Now, a thing about the show like the Sandman is that you kind of learn about other things, like, you know, you'll learn about Midsummer Night's Dream in this, and I had like no idea at all about Orpheus descending until I saw this show. And one of the cool things that's on the album is that Orpheus's voice is so incredible and magnificent that he literally will stop the forces of hell and get them to shut up and listen. How do you, like, when you're given like in any kind of project, like this is the best thing ever, or like this is as good as Mozart, how do you possibly live up to something like that, especially here?
It's an interesting question. Of course, yeah, there's something sort of faintly embarrassing that one is supposed to write a piece of music that can stop gods and fates and Robespierre and anyone else in its track. Well, that was an interesting one. So I started that song a long time ago, actually, because the show actually went on hiatus during the writers' strike. So if I were to look at my files, I think I probably started that song in 2022. And we did some recordings with Rory, who played Orpheus. We did those in London, and I think they were in English at the time. So you can see a random cat here. And then there was a huge, like, long chunk of time where just everything stopped, and you know, people were scattered to different jobs and whatever they were doing. And then I came back to it. Again, you know, I sent the song. I wrote the song. There were 2 songs I needed to write, and I sent them to Alan, the showrunner. And then he sent them to Neil and DC, and they latched onto them pretty much straight away. But they said, let's do it in Greek. So that was a bit of a hassle, a bit weird translating. It all worked in English quite nicely, and then we had to translate it into Greek. It didn't work quite so well, and we had to do a bit of fudging. And a few people who actually speak Greek noticed it and informed me, and I thought, well, there you go. It's television. It's not history or a language class. But it was, I know, yeah, it was slightly sort of icky to think that this is supposed to be something so gorgeous, so beautiful, that gods would be made to stop in their track. But you know, Rory sang his socks off. I mean, he worked really hard. I mean, you know, poor guy gets cast to be, you know, an actor who's without body for half the time he's in the show. But when he is in the show, he's got to be able to sing in ancient Greek and play a lyre. So fair dues to this guy, Rory. He really, you know, gave it his all. And it's quite. I thought the scene was beautiful. I was really helped by the visual effects, all the ghosts rising, and yeah, it was an unusual thing to have done. But the nice thing about having written that song well in advance and it having been embraced is that I could then use that theme and thread that really throughout the season. Whenever there's mention of Morpheus's son, Orpheus, I have that theme somewhere around on a recorder or somewhere, just keeping his presence alive.
So we're going to completely jump out of the realm of the Sandman, because Demetrius from Greece, his favorite score of yours is from Paris with Love, which is one of your first kind of major solo films. Can you talk a little bit about working on that score? It has an emotional core to it. Thank you, sir.
Wow, it's funny when I've sort of forgotten about that film completely. Well, I got that film really because the director wanted Harry Gregson Williams, my old mentor, to score the movie, but I just don't think it was going to work financially, I guess. So the director, Pierre, had second best, which was me. And I know what they wanted, because they wanted Harry. So they wanted a sort of Harry, Tony Scott type score, which is a lot of sort of electronic, simmering electronics, but with a fairly heartfelt piano theme and strings. So I mean, it's my recollection of it. It's quite a simple score, but often, you know, the simple things resonate and leave people affected in a way that a more complicated scenario wouldn't have provided. Because it's now all coming back to me. One thing I do remember about it was when I got the movie and watched the first cut of it, and I heard all Harry's music in there in the temp track. I was a bit sort of, oh God, what do I do? I was working in Harry's studio at the time, I said to Harry, it's really tricky this, because they clearly love you and they've got your score all over the damn temp track. And he goes, well, you haven't written a score like this before, Dave. You've done Forbidden Kingdom, which is a fantasy movie with Chinese stuff going on, and you've done a dark thriller, Blood Creek. Well, I don't think it's not even a thriller, is it? A dark sort of horror, really. And then this is a thriller. This is a sort of modern day thriller. So he goes, you'll find your own little ways of doing things, and your own, might have some similarities, but you'll make it your own and do your own thing, which is very nice of him to sort of make me feel sort of welcome to sort of go into his universe. It was a fun project. I mean, it's one of those interesting movies where at any given moment, if you zoomed in on a certain scene, you might be tempted to think, oh, it's gone a bit comedic. And at other moments, it's sort of deadly serious. And I can still remember a scene towards the end where someone gets shot at the dining table. It was quite shocking. But it was a real fun beginning of my scoring journey. And as I say, that progression from fantasy to horror, then into thriller, was a fine and varied way for me to sort of start off my my career.
I have to throw in my favorite of your early career, which is it is not The Lost Boys, but I think it's definitely Joel Schumacher's second greatest vampire movie, and one of the scariest vampire movies I've ever seen. I mean, you've got a vampire horse. And
yes, you do.
Blood Creek, man, let's get this out. It is a scary film that barely anyone has ever seen.
It's shocking that it's fantastic. And that first reel, it's all shot in black and white, and it's really noirish and dark. I thought it was a great film, and of course, Michael Fassbender and what's the guy who's the Henry Cavill, is that how you pronounce his name? Cavill? Yeah. So, typical of Joel, sort of championing at the time, like these actors I don't think were particularly big. And Joel has done that time and time again. It was a real privilege working for Joel. And quite unexpected, I have to say. When Harry told me that there was a film that he couldn't do, here we go again. I've got Harry, an awful lot to thank Harry for. When he said he couldn't do this Schumacher film, and he goes, Dave, there's a Nazi vampire film which has got your name written all over it. I didn't quite know how to take that, but I took it, and just to spend time with Joel and to hear. I mean, often we had to get him to, Joel, you come here to listen to the music and give me notes so that we can record this and you can dub your movie. Sometimes it was a bit of an ordeal actually trying to keep him on that, because he was so gregarious and such a, wanting to tell us about this amazing time in New York at this thing and this thing. And I had a second run with him as well on Trespass, Nicolas Cage movie, which probably wasn't quite as good, actually. It certainly didn't have as much style. But yeah, that was a really fun film. And I don't really understand why it hasn't come out. I mean, I've seen plenty of worse films than that. I don't know why someone that wouldn't, even at this stage, I would have thought it was worth someone's while saying, let's get this out, a slightly more mainstream thing. But God knows how these things work. Well beyond my pay grade. I've no idea.
So, I mean, I just imagine you're basically saying, Joel, I don't want to hear any more backstage stories about The Wiz.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You've got to get to the vampire horse. I mean, I would have got the car wash personally. But now, going back to The Sandman, one episode I absolutely loved this season was the Who Gets the Key to Hell episode.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of like in one of the more active episodes of the season.
It's a great episode. I mean, it's funny you use the word active because, of course, we were discussing this earlier, that, it's not a show that is action driven at all. I remember when I first, when I had the meeting, when I got the job, they told me there wasn't going to be much action in it. Almost like, do you mind? Are you going to be sad that there is an action in it? And it was quite the opposite. It was the music to my ears. But yes, that episode, I can't remember which episode that is. I think it may be episode 3 or.
I think it's 3. Yeah.
3. Yeah, it's fun. We're meeting lots of kind of strange characters are amassing, and then we got that sort of magic show going on with Cain and Abel, people being chopped in half. It's definitely got sort of some dark humor in there and some weird sex scene going on. It just, what one wants in a show like this, it was possibly more evident in season 1, where the first 7 episodes really chopped and changed from one space or era to another. I'd say it's a little bit more consistent, and that the through line is a little bit more consistent in season 2. But when you get, the Midsummer Night's Dream, or you go to Greece, or you go to where all these people are, the delegates are arriving for who's going to get the key, it just creates more opportunity for writing. You don't think, oh my God, I'm just doing the same thing for 12 episodes. And I think there's still an episode to come which has got a unique tone to it as well. It's always more stimulating. I mean, it makes me think back now when I scored The Good Wife, and I can't remember, it must be 130 episodes. And of course there you're not moving from Greece, ancient Greece, to hell. I mean, they're very different beasts, obviously, but obviously I think when you've got different locations and different eras and settings, it just creates, I think, more opportunity to play in.
Again, I really felt for Morpheus in the season. I have to admit, I got choked up when you finally see him cry. You really get a sense of the humanity of Morpheus in this season, particularly.
Well, you do, but there's a wonderful line. I think it's in episode 11, where I can't remember it exactly, but it's about it's something like Shakespeare says to him. It's sort of based on the "No man is an island," and Morpheus says, I am an island and I'm not a man. So or something like that. I'm misquoting it, but it sort of gutted me. It was this realization that he desperately wants to be human and interact on a human level, and he just by design can't. And I found that quite crushing, that realization of his inadequacies. And that's, again, what's such a brilliant thing about the show. When I started season 2, I met the showrunner Alan in London, for one and only time I've met him, and I said, where do we go this season? What are we doing? I hadn't seen anything at this point, and he goes, well, all those emotions that we tried to mine and help people experience in season 1, we're doubling down this season, and we are just going to make people cry, and we're just going to make people happy once in a while. It's not too much of that. And we're just going to make people feel, just let them feel. And I think that's really what season 2 season 2 is all about. It's feeling things.
Yeah, and what's kind of weird is the conundrum, because what did Morpheus actually do? He basically put his son out of his misery, and now he has to die for it. Yeah. It's like on an After Hours. All I wanted to do was meet a nice girl, and now I have to die for it.
Consequences. Yeah.
What's up with it? Because you just feel it's pretty unjust, Yeah,
I mean, I have to say, from a storytelling point of view, it's quite dense, I think, because you've got the whole Lighter Hall participation in that, and then you've got the fates, you've got the indifference of his parents, and even who is it who sort of goads him along? It's Desire. So it's in terms of, if you were to say, could someone have sort of prevented this from happening? Could someone have intervened and sort of said, hold on a minute, he was actually sort of, as you say, putting his son out of his misery. Does it have to come to this? It felt like there's a multitude of characters there. You would have thought someone could have popped their head in and said, hold on a minute. But I think this was just the fate. I think, if the endless spill family blood, this is their fate. This is their destiny. Which is... Yeah, obviously.
It's it's the writer acting as God, basically.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Neil Gaiman, is God. And what's interesting is that there's definitely a religious quality to the show, but yet there's really no mention of God at all. Which is kind of like a typical thing in the Gaiman of like American Gods and the Gaiman verse and stuff in general is that it never deals with God. How did you kind of maybe in a back way want to deal with like God or religion with this?
It's funny. It's an interesting observation. I mean, I feel that I've brought at certain times I actually used two vocal groups sing on the score. One is a cathedral choir, the very choir, in fact, which I used to sing in, and which the Last Temptation of Christ. When I was a boy, I sang in a choir called the Welsh Cathedral Choir, and this iteration of the choir is singing in the score. So they're bringing a very typical Anglican choral tradition to it. And there's another group called the Oxford Camerata, which an Oxford choir, again bringing that traditional sort of church sound. When the Sandman dies and is processed, his coffin is taken through the church, or they have a procession through the church, it does have a very church-like liturgical musical score to it. So you're right, nothing's ever alluded to. We never literally say God or anything that anchors us into any particular faith. But I must add, I'm an atheist, so I'm not trying to wedge any religion into it either. Having said which, I do have choral music in my blood, and I do think I brought that to the party, and no one objected. It's an interesting point. Someone could have turned around and said, "Oh, you know what? That sounds a bit sort of churchy and a bit sort of choir boy like," but it was embraced, and not only embraced. Sort of when a little bit of it was heard, it was said, "Can we expand on that? Can we have more of it?" Basically, right. So maybe that sort of the fact that it wasn't in the source material, they heard it and cottoned onto it and thought actually it's additive because it's not there, and it's not I haven't gone in Latin dies irae die or anything like that. But whenever, apart from Orpheus's song, which no one can understand because it's in Greek, whenever I do use vocal, and even then it's in sort of slightly fucked up Greek, but when I do any vocal work, I always made sure that the text was just obscure enough that you didn't really know what it was, and you weren't trying to say this is belongs to the mass or this belongs to anything like that. So that's interesting though about Gaiman's thing. But I think that's Neil in a nutshell. He's got biblical Cain and Abel actually are biblical references.
Right, exactly. So there's I've got to ask. Last Temptation of Christ is one of the greatest films I've ever seen and one of the greatest scores I've ever heard. But obviously there's a huge amount of controvery. How old were you when you sang on this? Did you see picture when you were singing to it?
I didn't understand
what this would become, or
it was an interesting. I would have been age 10 or 11, and because Peter Gabriel doesn't live very far from where I sang as a boy, and in fact where I live now, I live in the same place, sort of come full circle, and we got this opportunity to sing on it, and we as children we just did what we were told. You're singing on this score. We thought, what's a score? What's a movie? And it turned out to be a bit problematic, and the people in charge of the choir, in the end, insisted that our vocals were removed from the film. They remain on the soundtrack, which, funny enough, I listened to a little bit of the other day because someone referenced it for something or other. But it did get pulled out of the film because it was felt that a Christian cathedral choir should not have their vocals on the film. I can't remember the first time I watched a film. I think my parents may have let me watch it maybe a year or two after that. And it did at the time feel quite when's the last time you watched it, Daniel, out of interest?
Oh, I actually did a segment on the music of it for Imprint.
Right.
Australia put it out on Blu-ray as part of a Martin Scorsese religion box set, which had Kundun and Silence on it. So I did a whole kind of overview of the score. So I watched it maybe about a couple months ago, but I'll never forget. Obviously I'm a Jewish kind of atheist, but man, just because that score really was revolutionary, and it was
revolutionary. I think it set a whole new tone for how biblical music is written.
It created world music and film,
and included world music, and way more honest to a certain extent than the biblical scores that came before, which were quite symphonic and obviously.
Right.
So far, I mean, beautiful music, but so far away from anything that could be considered authentic. What I am curious about, though, is with in the 30 odd years, almost 40 years that have elapsed since. Would we perhaps look at that film now and think, oh, what were we worried about back then? It was actually quite tame by comparison. I don't know.
Given what's empowered, I think it's probably the reaction might be worse than what it got. Oh my goodness! But
it was. I mean, for me, it opened my mind.
Yeah.
Everything that was to come after. I mean, I didn't watch the film at the time, so I can't say that I understood exactly what was going on, but what I did take away from the experience was, here is some amazing music that I'd never heard before, synths and world music plus our voices choir, and I knew it was being married to the moving image, and I thought, wow, that's music can do that as well as all the other stuff that it can do. And it took me a while to figure out how to do something about it, but I did love the concept as a child.
It's amazing. How did you want to handle because I'd never read the comic book. Okay, it's a comic book, guys, of Sandman, and I had no idea that essentially this really follows the comic book or the graphic novel. How did you want to handle the transformation into his rebirth into a new Sandman? Is there any kind of musical difference between how you would treat Morpheus and this new person?
Oh, you mean with when Daniel becomes the Sandman at the end?
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that as I think people do know, if they followed accurately, we made the amount of episodes we were always set out to make. There was some articles saying the show was cancelled. It was never cancelled. There was going to be a season 2, which accomplished everything that the writers wanted to write. So they got to the end, and you got one more installment to come on the Thursday. Sort of by ratio, obviously, we live with the new incarnation of the Sandman for a very brief period of time. And at the spotting session for that, there's really one episode. I think he appears at the end of 210, and then 211 is his episode, and him trying to understand what his responsibilities are and what his awesome responsibilities are. I felt there wasn't really enough time to give him a new melody and a brand new Sandman theme, because I thought, how can it really register as a theme if we only see this person for one episode? So what I did rather was reorchestrate it, give it its own instrumentation, and give it a bit more sort of wide-eyed and a bit more positive, a bit more aspirational. And I think the final cue, when he is with his siblings having dinner and they've welcomed him and accepted him, it is one of the more positive cues from the whole show. So much so, actually, that I didn't put it on the album because it felt sort of out of place. I thought everything else has got a heavier, darker mood to it. And when I put that on the end of the album, I originally had it there, and I thought, yeah, I mean, it makes sense chronologically. It was the final piece of music, but it just, for me, it didn't really feel like it was the Sandman. It felt like it was an exploration into something. It would be lovely to think that at some point, when things have calmed down a little bit on the political problems with this show with Neil, that there might be a groundswell to explore further Daniel's role as the Sandman and look deeper into that. I think, there isn't a person I know who's worked on it who wouldn't be 100% up for regrouping to do that. But obviously at the moment, we've got to just be grateful that we've got out what we've got out, and hope that goes down well with people.
Well, I think that could, depending on hopefully the ratings of this, you could definitely keep this going with, of course, someone else writing the new adventures of Daniel.
Yeah.
Let's get James Gunn. Now, got a question again. An earlier film you did, which I really quite enjoyed, and you have scored the sequel. And Louis Bersolini would like to know, hey, David Buckley, no spoilers, of course, but are you excited to be returning to score the sequel to Greenland? I mean, we've been warned there's another asteroid, maybe a spaceship heading to Earth to destroy it. But
well, I mean, I'm excited, but I've done it now. It's in the can, and I don't know if there's a release date yet given to it. You know, it's an interesting one. I wasn't expecting a sequel to it. I felt that the first film was, it seemed to hit all the right things at the right time as well. I think because it was a COVID movie, and people just sort of dug it, and it was quite gratifying. And so I thought that's a standalone thing. We've done it right. People have enjoyed it. I did question before I started the Greenland 2, what are we going to do? What is the further story to tell? But it turns out there is one, and obviously I can't really say anything about it other than the adventure does continue. And you know, I think you could possibly imagine that we saw at the end of the first movie a world, a group of people who have survived the collision, the asteroid hitting the Earth. So there is a sense of survival and how do we deal with a new world. So it was interesting. It was certainly an interesting one to score. Looking at sort of more dystopian kind of sounds, and I had recorded, because I keep recording choirs, that's all I seem to be able to do. In the first one I had recorded choirs and had this boy choir singing over the top. This one I recorded just a couple of individual voices and mutated them and made them sound a bit more sort of otherworldly and broken. So yeah, it was a fun sequel to do, and I'd love to think that people will enjoy it as much as the first one.
Yeah, and I have to really say that the music in Sandman is just gorgeous. I mean, you got a great mix on the show. I mean, how did you get the orchestra to sound the choir? How did you get this to sound so good?
Well, I must pass this on to Jeff Biggers has mixed my scores. He used to work for Hans Zimmer, and I was given him. I remember I asked Harry way back when. I said, I need someone to mix the score of mine. And he said, you'll get on well with Jeff Biggers. And we do get on really well. He sits in LA and mixes it. I sit in England and listen to him playing it back. I mean, we're pulling in bits from all over the place. So we recorded the strings, most of the orchestra in Prague. We did some of it with the BBC Concert Orchestra in London, choirs in London, soloists in Switzerland, soloists in America. I mean, here, there, and everywhere, there's bits coming in. And Jeff Biggers, the mixer, the genius, slots it all in, and must have a really good reverb plug-in and makes it all kind of fit and work together. I think it's quite an ordeal because, as I say, there's a huge minute count. So it's a lot of hard work. But that's very gratifying to hear that it sounds good. That's not normally what that's a nice comment to have, just because it means that other people's contributions to this are being acknowledged as well. So I'll let Jeff know. He'll like.
Yeah, it sounds tremendous. What is up ahead for you?
So I am right in the middle of the Lincoln Lawyer season 4. Which is a bit of a funky festival. So it's all wah-wah guitars and groovy bass lines, which is lovely to do. It's fun. I enjoy it. It's different, so different to The Sandman. And also what's so different is a Jason Statham movie, which I'm doing for the same director as Greenland, Roman War. So we're now kicking some ass with Statham rather than Gerard Butler. And that's going well. That's quite fun. And I've just finished and just had recorded an opera, a chamber opera, which I have been toiling on this year, almost as I was commissioned to do it, but it became a labor of love and quite an interesting one, actually. I was doing it roughly at the same time as The Sandman, and I took it out of me but it was a really rewarding experience. And there's hopefully some more performances of that coming later this year.
So we've got our final question from Johnny Martin. Having worked on such a wide range of great projects, any quote dream gigs you have your eye on? Awful pun intended.
That's an interesting question. I'll be honest with you. I've been quite lucky that for the last 4 or 5 years, I've had a pretty steady stream of work. The Sandman being at the core of it, actually. And I had The Good Fight, which was a show which I was quite proud of, and Evil, which finished in the last couple of years. And I've had this nice work with Rick, Roman War. So I've had very few breaks in my schedule. And then, of course, the mere suggestion of it might have a few weeks off over the Christmas, and I decided I'd write a bloody opera just so I absolutely couldn't take any time off. So I haven't really looked forward much to anything, and I haven't pushed my agent in terms of anything, but so nothing specific. If there were a general requirement from my sort of needs as a creator of music, I'd love to continue something in the realm of the Sandman, or something that continues to let me be as expressive as that. I don't really mind what it is. It doesn't bother me whether it's any particular genre, but I think a lot of filmmakers now want music to be quite muted, and it's not to say that I think they're wrong either. I think there are scores and movies which work because the music isn't doing too much and it's playing a sort of secondary or tertiary role in the sonic landscape. And I do know, I think, how to write those sort of scores, but it's a real pleasure when you can exercise some muscle and bring melody to the foreground and bring harmony and orchestration. That has to be who I genuinely am. That's where I started my musical life. So I think, having now had a real nice taste of that over the 4 years I've been doing the Sandman, I'd be keen to pursue more of that. Well, that's the dream.
I want to see him do season 3, The Further Adventures of Daniel. I know there's a good person who might be able to do it, whatever. Anyway, David, I just want to thank you so much for joining us at Film Music Live. See the concluding season 2 of Sandman on Netflix with a last word from Death on July 31st. Both seasons of David Buckley's Sandman scores are available on Water Tower Music. Thanks to our show producer, Dale Turner, Rocco Carosa at Water Tower Music, and graphic designer Mark Banning. And I'll see you on the next Film Music Live.